firstly, thank you for people who have joined us online. I can see the little eye in the top of our screen clicked up to 12. So there's a few people taking their lunch break to listen to our thoughts on digital strategy, which is great. So our title really today is Digital Strategy in Hospitality, subtitle of Experience, Use and Space. And very fortunate to be joined today, along with my colleagues from CBRE, by two guests, Joe Pettigrew, who's the SVP of Commercial at Yotel, and Michael Grove, who's the MD for Hotstats for EMEA. So thanks, guys, for joining. Look forward to your contribution. And on the CBRE side, Nick Wright, who heads up our digital sales, and James Effingham, sector lead for hospitality from our building consultancy team, and myself, Owen Pritchard, COO of the hotels team for Europe. So the half an hour today really is going to be looking at, what does digital strategy mean to us in the hotel space? How does that play out into the wider real estate space? And what do you need to be doing to make sure that you can adopt and implement a digital strategy for yourselves? So let's kick off then really with trying to define what we mean by digital strategy. I'm sure it's a bit like social media. It means different things to different people. So let's take the first question to Joe, really. From an operator's perspective, ultimately the end user of a hotel, what is a digital strategy for Yotel and how do you go about developing one?
Yeah, so from an operator's point of view, I think the digital strategy can pretty much be summed up to enhancing the guest experience at a lower cost while driving higher revenue potentials through the use of technology. So it's really about how are we able to actually generate more revenue with the reduced cost, all the while enhancing your guest experience. And actually, all of these things go hand in hand, and so we tend to put a lot of our focus onto the enhancement of the guest experience, which actually forms really and defines our brand, but also the types of experience that our guests can expect, which in turn actually drives up our revenue because guests are specifically seeking out that experience that we're providing, which is actually enabled by technology, which also consequently, helps us reduce the cost.
Okay, so starting with the experience, and if we move kind of to the other end of the spectrum about how that experience is delivered from a building perspective, James, where do you see the kind of the core kind of pillars of a digital strategy, and what does it mean from your perspective, looking at, perhaps more the property side rather than the experience side?
Yeah, no, thank you, Owen. Obviously, Joe touched on the guest experience side of that, but equally important, I think, is about the building operation and its management, and through the use of smart building tech, being able to operate the buildings far more efficiently in terms of the way that energy is consumed or utilized, how the mechanical and electrical services are configured and performing, and around tech that can help reduce waste, things like water consumption or heat, and helping to work towards sustainability or ESG targets of commitment, as well as providing you with data to be able to better understand what's working well in your building, or perhaps what needs to be addressed through either enhancements or adjustments.
And Mike, what are you seeing from your perspective? You obviously deal with a huge range of operators across multiple geographies in Europe. How are you seeing them kind of define their digital strategy and try to execute?
Well, I think the hotel industry in general is playing a little bit of catch up. The global population is on a digital strategy in some ways, isn't it? We're all moving and guest expectations are changing. And I think hotels are trying to keep up with that, using the best of the data to drive the likes of efficiencies and optimization of the processes within the building to further enhance the customer experience and drive down costs and drive up revenues. From our point of view, it's about adding that layer of objectivity, something that another angle from use of experience when you're creating a strategy, using use of your own opinion and the collective kind of thoughts and brainstorm mixed with utilizing data as that kind of objective part of that conversation. And I think that's something that we have to hand now. There's definitely no lack of data in the hotel industry. I think that the digital strategy, from my point of view, and how we're currently working with a lot of operators, is to interpret it and make it easy to use. I think is the challenge right now, because we have so much of it.
I think that's a key point, because if you think experience means different things to different people and is largely intangible, Nick, from picking up on that comment that Mike has made, and using your experience of other asset classes in your role, how can kind of the hospitality space learn from them with kind of defining and developing a digital strategy?
Well, Owen, I'm not sure you really need me. I think the three speakers have touched on everything I would have said. But I think it's a good point around actually, what do we learn from other asset classes and where do we go? I think Joe's point is really important, understanding what the outcome is. You can't shape a strategy until you understand what direction you're traveling in. And, that experience-led guest experience is absolutely critical in hospitality. And I think that's really important. What we talk about with other clients in other asset classes is the PhD of buildings. So picking up James's point, the P representing the physical technologies and systems and equipment of a building, and pointing to Joe around the H, which is the human, the experience-led, and Michael's point again is the D, that's the data and the digital, that is that connective tissue that brings both of them together. And I think the challenge that we all face, particularly across real estate, is understanding the complexities of that data, which quite often isn't stored in the best format, and certainly not in a format that is usable to connect and integrate it. Because ultimately where we're getting to is that connection between James's physical side and Joe's experience-led side that enables a better outcome and better output from the building, ultimately driving greater operational efficiency and reducing cost.
Joe, is that something that, with many of your hotels, I guess, being new build, is that something you found perhaps easier? I know you've been at other large hotel operators before, perhaps their stock's been a different mix, but that combination of data through to experience, how are you looking at that now in a kind of actual unit level for Yotel?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick is spot on. It's very, very difficult to actually make that happen. And so Michael is correct in that we have a lot of data. We're literally swimming in data, but a lot of that is sometimes just unusable, or you can't then draw correlation or causation between one set of data that affects the other pieces. So as we talk about how does the experience, how can we basically, you look at the experience and look at space and maybe, draw some sense of what one is doing to another, or how we can enhance one over another by using, enhancing experience and space and vice versa. Those things are very, very difficult. And a lot of that has to do with just the type of data that we get and all the various different players in the marketplace that supply some of these systems for various pieces that are just not made to talk to one another.
That's a brilliant lead in for Mike to say how Hotstats can, I guess, help with that. But Mike, facetious comment aside, how are you trying to take that huge amount of data and channel it and allow people to kind of access what they need, get that insight quickly so that they can then build their plans around that?
Well, I mean, from Hotstats' perspective, I see the P&L benchmarking side of things as very much the output of all of the other actions you have within the building. So there's lots of various moving parts, and there's lots of other types of benchmarking. But of course, the impact, the output of that on the P&L is both the starting and the end point of any strategy. I think that really, it does come back to that. When it comes to pulling the data together, I think we have various systems that I think we implement in hotels that cover lots of different bases. And And it's almost started with a core idea, and it's kind of like that is the area that we specialize in, but we have bolt-on services that we're not necessarily the professionals in, that we, you know, that they start adding to the systems themselves. So there's lots of, like Joe said, lots of data available, and I'm sure that the core side of the products that have been implemented in the buildings have that, you know, accuracy and have the ability, you're able to draw that data. But the supplementary parts of it, when, you know, the supplier themselves might not be the professional in or able to really deliver that in its entirety, and also the hoteliers themselves possibly don't know best how to use that. And I think that comes on to another part of it from our point of view. I think that is data talent. It's the ability to work with people, working with the right people, because generally from Hotstats' point of view, we'll deal mostly with the finance or the ops guys. But I think to best use the data from an integration point of view and from an output point of view, it's often better that we speak with the IT teams, for instance, who actually understand, you know, the best way that can be drawn together, and then start with ops and finance to really, you know, to be able to drive it out through the business. So I think our point is, it's easy enough to say that we provide the API, we provide lots of different KPIs and the ability to kind of channel that down. But I think the education part of it is probably the bit that I spend the most time on from an implementation point of view. And I think that is really kind of key to everything that we're doing from a data point of view.
James or Nick, anything to pick up on that? Because obviously, again, you're seeing it from a different perspective than our very hotel focused from the other three.
I think it's really interesting, and Joe's point is smack in the middle of this, is if we take a look at what I'm seeing across the office market at the moment, and from an occupier perspective, so where we advise large global occupiers around getting back into the office, what we've seen is that the pandemic has shifted existing trends and accelerated them, and that the demand for digital and technology is now pressing. So for a lot of our clients, what was a nice to have around sorting out the digital element and installing technology has become a must have. And I suppose the point I'm making is that for occupiers, that's around how do I get people back into the building using sensors that are capturing space usage and desk booking, etc., because they've all got to be compliant with social distancing. But the reason that's really interesting for our clients is that they now have a starting point. So I think what I'm trying to say is that finding that starting point and a use case that you can begin to experiment and pilot with different technologies and with different data, starting small and getting comfortable with it, and then being able to grow that out. And to Michael's point, the biggest challenge is around the talent or the skills that we will need. And also the final bit of that is none of this happens without a comprehensive change management program and education and communication.
And James, any point to add, kind of, you know, relating that kind of cultural bit, organizational bit to your maybe physical management of the property so that you tie the whole thing together?
Yeah, I think it's some interesting points there. And I think picking up on the point about simplicity is probably a key to it, and being able, you know, to pick your way through the data. And something that we've seen that is really helping to do that, to converge different data sources and information, is through the use of a digital twin, which in effect is a 3D model of your building, which can incorporate anything from, you know, complex CAD data, so you can actually see the skeleton and the fabric of the building, through to the services that sit within it, so that, you know, you have a clickable environment, if you like, whereby excuse me, you can go into either static information about, you know, how something is built, or perhaps live data information on, say, how an air conditioning system is working. And that can be linked with many different types of systems, whether it's, you know, building management system, HVAC, security, or indeed, you know, perhaps you're maintaining inventory lists. It's really just a way that you can bring all of that together in a very intuitive and readily accessed way. And I think it also then gives you perhaps the basis for future development as well. If you're using things like, you know, enhanced reality or 3D or virtual reality, you can look around your property from the interior, depending how you view it, and you could say, look at how, you know, perhaps some conversion or refurbishment works could look in situ. That's the sort of thing that, you know, has been done in the office environment, and the ability very quickly to flip and look at different options. The point being is flexibility, that, you know, a digital twin is something that you can build out, and picking up on Nick's point, you need to start small and then incrementally, you know, move from there. But to me, the ultimate would be, you know, to have a complete digital twin of a single asset or of a whole portfolio that you can then draw data from.
And Joe, picking up on James's point around the digital twin, and how Yotel will be developing their strategy going forward. You mentioned in your first response around the experience. How are you going to kind of take that and ensure that you're shaping your strategy for the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, I think the key component of that is actually trying to understand who our guests are and what they want, and what is more efficient for us and actually most beneficial to us. So a lot of that has to happen with a good data analysis, and we really put the guests at the center of everything that we do, right? The digital strategy, in our view, begins and ends with the guest. So who are our guests, and what do they do when they're at our hotel? How do they book? How do they find out about us? What do they talk to? How do they talk to their friends and families about us? If at all, and where and how does that happen? And what gets them to come back and stay with us again? And actually understanding and dissecting that information, then drawing our overall and bigger strategies around, okay, well, how do we then enhance their experience using digital and technologies to enhance their experience, and therefore that we're able to basically amplify that satisfaction, or replicate the level of service and the experience that they are wanting through the use of digital. So we're really just kind of looking at the use of digital as how do we enhance that, and actually only try to focus on that specific segment of guests that resonate with us the most, and the ones that are going to be the most beneficial to our operating bottom line as well.
So if I kind of encapsulate that, then it's taking what I guess 5 years ago would just been selling a night's sleep, but looking at how the entire customer journey, but also beyond the night's sleep, what other experience should you be providing or help facilitate as a hotel operator? Would that be a fair kind of summation?
Correct. That's precisely right. So I think even now, a lot of us are just focused on kind of the general, here's what I think our overall guest experience should look like. But nobody's really kind of focusing in on what does that look like for my customers, right? And my ideal customers, because that may not be the same as everyone else. So, you know, even if you have a debate around a simple idea of a check-in, you know, there will be some set of hotels and the guests who would love going up to a front desk to check in with a very welcoming and friendly staff. But, you know, our guests, we know, love checking in with the kiosk. They like to come in and just, you know, self-service, you know, themselves and checking in, get their keys and boom, you know, get into the room. And if they have any other questions about their stay that the kiosk didn't let them know about, you know, they'd use our chatbot or our chat technology to talk to us about those types of questions. And so, you know, it's not really necessarily about how do I make the most ideal experience for everyone. It's just how do I make the best experience for our ideal guests, and just narrowing in on that.
Understood. So that segmentation, which Hotstats obviously do to some extent in what you already do, Mike, how will you kind of develop your strategy, given that hotels are probably going to become more sophisticated at a unit level in their data capture and analysis? Is that something you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we very much align ourselves with the uniform system of accounts from a hotel KPI point of view. But we're already, and I know that the financial committee at the uniform, again, drawing up the next edition of the uniform system, are looking at the likes of, for instance, capturing energy consumption, capturing square meterage of the building, for instance, and various other parts that are kind of reactionary to the evolving hotel world. So we're having to think about that going forward. From our point of view, it'll be very much driven by financial data, because that's what we aim at. We're very much professionals in the profit and loss benchmarking game. But how you can use that to kind of dissect the type of customers and the output of the other scorecards that you have is I think where we will really fit in. It's the ability to be able to look at, for instance, as we were looking at the costs of repairs and maintenance in the building, or spend on capex, and how you can correlate the output from a guest experience point of view, so the guest reviews, whether that's Review Pro or the various providers of guest feedback, and correlate that against spending, whether that's payroll or how that impacts from a revenue point of view, what additional spend in the marketing department drives to online performance. All of those correlations we have one side of, and I think that will be our focus, is to continue to be able to provide that insight from the P&L that you can correlate against something that a professional in that area provides.
And Nick, from your perspective, what additional kind of sources of data or tools, I guess, do you see either already been implemented or soon to be implemented, which can help, hospitality, but also the wider real estate space?
I just think this is such a fascinating conversation, and excuse my slight ignorance around the hotel market, but in the office space, we talk about the hotelification of the office space. We talk about space as a service, and this shift from being a B2B provider of space to a B2C provider of customer experience and service. And yet what I'm hearing from the hotel area is that you've kind of got that data and you sort of understand a bit about the customer, but then it's how do you relate that into the experience? So you go back to the office part of it, and we're seeing the deployment of office apps, employee engagement apps, building apps that are becoming much more intuitive. So Joe, when you talk about, understanding your customer and what their requirements are, we have that in the sense that we have our own proprietary app Host. What that enables you to do is to, when you book a meeting room, it recognizes who you are and gives you your preference of meeting room. So if you've always been in the corner meeting room for 4 people and the temperature and the lighting has always been set in that way for a video conference, it will automatically suggest that room. And if that room isn't available, we'll give you an alternative. So you're beginning to see these kind of AI, machine learning driven technologies which interact with things like Microsoft 365 over preference. So I imagine from a hotel perspective, that's being able to understand, actually, guest A always has room Y, and he always expects a newspaper and a call in the morning. Those are preferences that you've got the data, and you can begin to create that unique experience for your guests through the use of an app. So I suspect it's how do you engage, and I think you intimated earlier that you've already got chatbots, you've already got those engagements, but can you kind of create something in that space where you were, when you arrive at the hotel, you're using that to check in, and we're seeing that in the office space, virtual check-ins and automatic check-in through the access control and security. If they don't want to do that, they have a preference, but you're recording those preferences, and that preferences are developing out, a much more unique customer guest experience.
I guess from your perspective then, Joe, it almost allows you to localize things and personalize things, but within the umbrella of the big brand and all the kind of benefits you get from that. Would that be something that you think you'll continue to put focus on?
Yes, absolutely. So the big brands, especially, there are some of them that do that well, especially. And from a Yotel, although we don't have our own sort of loyalty program, that's kind of the vehicle that everybody kind of uses to kind of get to exactly what Nick is talking about. It's really the single customer view, right? You have one customer and you have full 360-degree view of what that customer wants. Every booking channel, the little data about like what the preferences are, how many towels does that person like, yes, the temperatures or what kind of room that person stays in. And so that for as long as that person, we have that data, it doesn't matter whether that person is staying in Amsterdam or in New York, that we're able to cater to that preference and meet that personalized service no matter where that guest goes to stay in. And so, from a technology point of view, I think that is probably a little bit easier to do today than it probably was even 3 or 4 years ago. There are now lots of providers out there that are actually integrating well with the legacy hotel systems and whatnot. And so I think hotels are doing that. The challenge is always going to be, how do you do that at scale, right? It's so much easier to take that guest and then tailor that service to a single property, but trying to do that over 10, 50, 100 hotels is a lot more difficult, because now we're talking about standardizing systems and data structure and single database into, and making sure that happens throughout all the various different locations, and also the on-property staff are all properly trained on how to use those systems and actually deliver it in action.
I think that scalability is key. It goes back to Mike's point around the talent. And then you've obviously got some operators faced with a huge legacy estate where you've got product that's pretty old. And how do you kind of retrofit some of the system side to that? James, leading on to my final question, because I'm just conscious of our time ticking away, it kind of picks up on that. So if you don't develop a digital strategy, from your perspective, what are the inherent risks that go with that?
Well, I think principal point is, are you going to be falling behind your competition? You're going to be left behind, in terms of the ability to differentiate, and perhaps, how your guest experience might compare. Do you start then to lose guest preference or loyalty as a product of that? I think also from, an operational viewpoint, it becomes more difficult to predict the demands on your property in terms of things like, say yearly energy consumption, or, where you should be putting your life cycle maintenance CapEx budgets. Where should you be spending? Where should you not? How are you going to, optimize revenue? Those are all sorts of things that could be informed, if you had a cohesive digital strategy that had been implemented. And I think fundamentally, pressure on profitability through rising staffing and operational costs are really going to start to come from the other direction, with the lack of strategy in place.
And Nick, any additional points to add to that?
No, I think James is right. And James and I are working on a kind of building assessment survey that starts to understand the capability of an asset around its connectivity. Now, clearly in hotels, location is going to be king. You're not just going to walk out of a location because it doesn't do what you need it to do. But it's also really important in the capital planning around, is that building going to get to the point where we're delivering Joe's holy grail of individual guest experiences? But I think the key thing for me is, and I think we've all touched on it today, is, finding that starting point, understanding the use case, experimenting, starting small and growing over time as you can build more into it. We're all guilty of trying to do everything right first time. And I think we have to step away from that viewpoint and start thinking about individual cases, and then the capacity, back to your point, Owen, of, scale around that.
Thanks. Totally agree on that kind of bite-sized chunk bit. I think if you look at some of the examples where things haven't worked, it's because there's been perhaps too imprecise and maybe too grandiose an initial strategy that's been very difficult to implement. Any final points from Michael or Joe on that? The risks, I guess, if you don't evolve in this space and don't do it fairly quickly.
I think James's point about catch up is important, because if you're also playing catch up, that means you're always reacting to new things. COVID happens. Oh, and now what? So now every single hotel across the landscape, you see now everybody's focused on, okay, what about mobile check-in? Kind of a humanless, or kind of, let's say, low touch hotel experience. These sorts of things are now just, every hotel is really kind of reacting to anything new or different that are coming in. But if you don't have a vision for what you want to have as your overarching digital strategy, all you're really doing is throwing another system into the mix, really putting Band-Aids everywhere, and it just becomes this Frankenstein system that is incredibly difficult to manage, easy to break. And so you don't want to be playing a catch up. And I guess that's where that, to me, in my mind, is probably the biggest risk of not having a cohesive digital strategy.
Okay, I think we've hit the 2 o'clock mark. So any other final points from my panelists before I just quickly wrap up and thank people? No. Okay, excellent. I mean, thank you, gentlemen. Very interesting discussion. It's one that you know, could go on. I think it's so many facets to it, and clear that I think some of the takeaways are around being focused, making sure the objectives are specific, that they're bite-sized, and that you've got a clear implementation plan, but in the hotel space, very much related to your guests. I think the point that Joe made earlier on about Yotel being very focused on the digital strategy that is appropriate for their guests, rather than just, you know, picking things and developing things in an ad hoc way because you're playing catch up. So key that you've got the technology right, but key that you've got the organizational and the cultural changes in place, and you embrace it from a whole kind of change management perspective rather than just a purely technological perspective. So thank you very much. Kate has put up a chat on the right hand side for those that, or you can see it. So if you want to pick up on any points with our panelists separately, then that can be done. And obviously our email addresses and everything will be circulated by Bench as part of the kind of wash up of the event. So thank you, gentlemen, my panelists today, for joining. Have a great afternoon and happy holidays to everyone.
Thanks,